We're on the record.
All right, good evening, ladies and gentlemen. This is a regularly scheduled meeting of Montclair Planning Board. Notice of this meeting is posted in local papers and also posted in the lobby of this building. We are being broadcast live on Channel 34 and streamed live and on demand on YouTube. Also available on the town's website, montclairnjusa.org. This meeting is a quasi-judicial proceeding, meaning we have powers and procedures resembling a court of law. We're obligated to objectively determine facts and draw conclusions from them in order to provide a basis for official action. Any questions or comments during these proceedings should be limited to the issues that we are considering and the type of information that we are allowed to receive under the New Jersey Municipal Land Use Law. We would ask that decorum appropriate for a courtroom be maintained at all times. First order of business this evening is our roll call.
Chair Wynn?
Here.
Vice Chair Brodock?
Here.
Mr. Schwartz?
Here.
Mr. Cook?
Here.
Councilor Schlager? Ms. Willis?
Here.
Mr. Rooney?
Here.
Mr. Ian Wally is excused. Ms. Logman?
Here.
Mr. Barr is excused. And Mr. Gilmer?
Here.
Okay.
We have minutes from February 24th meeting.
Yeah, I've received changes to the minutes from Ms. Lockman and a suggestion from Mr. Ian Wally that we add a statement to the minutes about the parking variance. And I have some suggested language, which is the sentence that says, Mr. Tylek agreed to purchase 4 parking space permits in the deck for the Arts Center use. I think we should follow that with a clarification that a board member questioned the parking variance, noting that the zoning ordinance does not have a requirement for art galleries. The applicant stated that the parking deficiency will increase by 2 spaces. That's basically summarized what was stated. Okay.
All right, I'd like to move that we approve the minutes with the recommended amendments,
Second.
corrections.
Who second? Was that Ms. Willis? Okay, all in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? Abstentions?
Abstain.
Okay.
All right, that brings us to the application of 37 Orange Road.
I have, we've had a couple of new submissions, which I have marked for the record. Just read the new exhibits. And Tom, I can give this to you. I can mail it to you tomorrow. A72 are the architectural plans prepared by Minna Wasco, dated February 27th, 2020. A73 are the engineering plans. Okay, my microphone is on. A73 are the engineering plans prepared by Langen Engineering, dated February 21st, 2020. A74 is the alternative valet parking plan prepared by Langen Engineering, sheet TM103, dated February 27th, 2020. A75 is the report written by Barton Ross, dated March 3rd, 2020. And A76 is the report from Suburban Consulting Engineers, dated March 2nd, 2020.
Thank you, and good evening, Mr. Chairman. Again, my name is Tom Troutner. I'm the attorney from Chiesa, Shaheni, and Gia Tomasi on behalf of the applicant, 837 Orange Road, Montclair, LLC. And we have with us tonight 3 witnesses, hoping to complete some testimony. First, Kevin Webb from Langen Engineering. Let's see if I can get a little closer. Okay. So we have 3 witnesses with us here tonight. Kevin Webb from Langen Engineering to complete some testimony regarding engineering, particularly with a few comments that were made at prior meetings and our recent submission, which I think has been marked as A73. We have Jack Raker from Minnow and Wasco to testify regarding some updated architectural plans and addressing some comments by this body in previous meetings. And then finally, we have Sean Moronsky from Langen Engineering, our professional planner, who would offer professional planning testimony in conjunction with the deviations from the redevelopment plan that are being sought. Mr. Chairman, with your permission, I'd ask Kevin Webb to come back up. He's been previously sworn, but we can swear him again if need be.
No, it won't be necessary. But you have to put your full name on the record, spell your last name.
Good evening, Kevin Webb, Kevin Webb.
Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you. So the exhibit that's on the screen is the site plan sheet that was part of the A73 exhibit. So it's the identical plan, the site plan that was included as part of the set. I just have three small things to discuss on this plan. The first is that in accordance with the board's wishes, we have eliminated the two-space drop-off along Orange Road. That was previously right in front of the vestibule for the residential area. We've adjusted the streetscape elements, the tree grates and the site lighting accordingly. So there's just a continuous curb line there. It expands the plaza to about 3,500 square feet from where it was previously about 3,000 square feet. We have also, at the request of the board, enhanced the pedestrian crosswalk at the proposed driveway here. It's shown, and it's just at this scale, the hatch doesn't show well, but what we've identified is that dark hatch area is a crosswalk that will be comprised of concrete that's integrally colored, really difficult for me to say, and scored independently from the treatment that is on the rest of the concrete driveway. Obviously, that the goal there is to provide a visual cue for both the vehicles and pedestrians to identify where that crosswalk is. The third is the final version of the fire lane striping along Centro Verde. We worked with your board engineer and the fire official to come up with a final solution there. And in fact, Fire Official Thomas, in an email at the end of February, confirmed his agreeance that what we have proposed on the plan meets his standard. If there's no further questions on that, I can talk about the alternative parking plan.
What color will the concrete be for the pedestrian walkway?
We haven't identified a color. We obviously will pick something that's both in keeping with the colors of the treatment for the bricks. Excuse me.
Are we going to vote tonight?
I don't know.
But if we are, I think we have to start over, unless the councilperson doesn't participate in the vote. I think we can. We didn't get that. We didn't get too far.
No problem.
Yo, you want to try that again and do it a little quicker?
Let's see if I can say integrally colored. I still can't say it well.
But also, okay, the front doors are locked. I couldn't get in. So aren't they supposed to be open for a public meeting? I don't know how to unlock the door.
Yes.
Okay.
I just, so to follow up that question, then you can restart. I noted that the architect's plan showed it as the same color as the pavers going across. I was wondering if that was actually what was going to happen.
I think it can be, if that's the choice. I think we're open to suggestion. I think that's sort of an obvious choice, you know.
Would seem like it to me.
Yes.
I was expecting we go with a color palette that matched with the brick tones and the streetscape, so it would be, you know, matching in aesthetics to the brick of the streetscape.
Sounds
That's
good.
fine.
All right, you can restart now.
Okay. Thank you.
We'll ask it again.
Maybe I'll weave it into my testimony.
Make it integral.
Excuse me, Mr. Webb?
Yes.
What exhibit is that you're looking at? What
Um,
number?
It's the site plan CS 101.
Oh,
I think
CS.
it's sheet 5, I believe, of the
Okay,
set,
thank you.
as part of Exhibit A73. So again, the exhibit that's up on the screen is the site plan that was submitted as part of the overall site plan package that was identified as Exhibit A73. It is drawing number CS 101. So there's 3 specific areas for changes that that I want to describe for the board. The first being that we eliminated the previously proposed drop-off for 2 spaces in front of the building pursuant to the request of the board and their professionals. So there will be just one common uniform curb line along Orange Road. We have adjusted the streetscape elements, including the tree grates and the site lights accordingly. The plaza that results is slightly larger. It's over 3,500 square feet, about 500 square feet than it was previously. We have also enhanced the pedestrian crosswalk at the driveway. That's reflected here. And as I described previously, but we'll put on the record officially now, the dark hatched area that's reflected is just drafting at this scale. It doesn't show through. It will be concrete. It will be provided with integral color. I did it better this time. And we'll have a unique scoring pattern. That color, I think, can be done in a palette that matches the rest of the brick tone for the rest of the streetscape, and will certainly complement the rest of that the plaza area. That crosswalk will provide a visual cue to both pedestrians and cars on the driveway. And the last item is the fire lane striping on Centro Verde. We have coordinated with the fire official and your board engineer on the method and the language associated with how to stripe that effectively. Fire official Thomas emailed his concurrence that what we had shown was in fact approved by his office on February 25th. So if there's no further questions, I can talk about the alternative layout plan that was requested. Thank you.
One quick question, and maybe you're not the right person to answer. What is the total length of the building along Orange Road?
Well, we do have the architect coming up after me
Okay.
who can answer that. So this is the alternative valet parking plan. It's identified as drawing number TM 103, dated February 27, 2020. This was the identified previously by Ms. Talley as Exhibit A74. There had been a discussion as part of the testimony provided by the Mr. Sokic, our parking and valet management expert. How many additional spaces? Our base plan included 5 spaces that were parked in aisles that would be valet managed. Obviously, there's the entire garage in a sense is valet managed, but specifically we had proposed 5 spaces, parking spaces to be identified in the aisles. The question from the board was how many more could you get? And conservatively, meaning conservatively low, we identified that there could be an additional 6 spaces parked in aisles in addition to the 73. Theoretically, that would grow the parking supply on the site from 73 to 79. Where we showed those additional 6, first let me identify, we had 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 in the base plan, and we identified 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, essentially tandem parking in the 2 end aisles and providing in the central aisle 2 additional spaces. So again, I think in the context of what Mr. Sokich had said, is they believe that's well within their ability to effectively manage and still maintain essentially a quality of service in terms of managing the entire capacity of the deck. This plan was put forth to identify exactly where those additional spaces that he testified to would in fact be located on the site. That's all I have.
I have a question. I know you talked about this before, but can you tell me what it would take to put the driveway in Central Verde rather than an Orange Road?
Complete redesign of the deck. What there is, it's really, it's not impossible, but it's relatively infeasible. And it's because the elevation of Orange Road here and the elevation of Central Verde here are several feet in elevation difference. So we'd have to provide a ramp inside the parking garage itself.
Ramp
which
to go up?
It would, in this case, this elevation is actually higher than this elevation. So depending on your perspective, up or down. But
You'd have to flatten the whole site to be on the same level as Orange Road.
well, we'd have to, we actually couldn't do that and still make effective connections to both locations. I mean, if you're trying to, say, eliminate the driveway from Orange Road altogether.
Yes.
I mean, Central Verde is a one-way circulation pattern. It would not, in my opinion, provide effective access to the site.
You'd go in the same, and then you'd go out and you'd turn right.
But you can only access the site from the east.
Yes.
And I think that's an ineffective access strategy for this building, to have no access at all from Orange Road. I mean, they couldn't even access Orange Road to Central Verde because you'd have to go around the block
Right.
to access that.
Right. But it could be done.
It would, again, I think it's an ineffective way to access the site. It physically could be done, yes.
Okay, thank you.
Mhm.
And the valet, to make this work again, just timing-wise, we said valet would be what periods of time, 24/7?
Actually, I don't honestly recall exactly what Mr. Sokich's testimony was.
Because we bounced around a little bit with the numbers there on what you might need or might not need. I just don't know if, counsel, do you remember what was testified?
I believe the testimony was that it's 24-hour valet.
And that it would be limited only to building inhabitants, basically. Residences of the building would be the only ones with spots under the building. Is that right?
Well, there is access to support what we're calling the retail space broadly. They would also have the opportunity to park in those spaces. So the valet would serve all patrons of all users of the site, both residents of the residential units and also visitors to that retail space.
Okay. I understood from the last time that we heard testimony it would be restricted in some way to people that were inside of the building, but...
I think under the prior arrangement, when we were still considering that the retail space would be supported in the Orange Road deck, that was the case. Now, all of the parking is for the site. All the parking demand is, in fact, provided on the site itself. We're not relying on the Orange Road deck whatsoever.
That's what
Yes.
I'm seeing.
Does the valet have an office space, or?
They do. The architect can maybe highlight this further, but there is an office and actually a bathroom for the valet space that's included, right, basically center on that drive aisle. I can show you again if you want to see. It's right here at essentially the center of the building.
Could you say a little more about how the valet service will operate in terms of the business? I know that, for example, if you are a customer, if you live in the residence, then you have something which allows you to come and go without worrying about it. If you are a shopper who wants to use the retail space, is there anything that identifies them or gives them priority, or how does that work? Is there anything at all that lends favor to people who are shopping in the retail?
Lends favor over who? I mean, again, they'd only be those people shopping in the retail or the residences. It's not open for the general public except for those patrons of the retail. So,
I'm trying to tell, how do you identify the retail customer? That's what I'm asking.
okay. I believe Mr. Sokich identified that they had management systems in place, but I don't, again, that's not specifically my area of expertise, the manner in which that they were going to manage the incoming and outgoing cars in that fashion. They talked about having apps, and there's potential. Of course, we don't know who the tenant of the retail space is going to be, whether or not there'd be an arrangement to somehow, essentially validate parking, things like that.
So it's going to be different than it is at the big deck, where the people who are shopping at Valley and Bloom or whatever have no identity, they just are a part of the public. It'll be different than that. Is that what you're saying?
I'm sorry, could you rephrase the question? It's going to be different than the way the Orange Road deck is managed? Is that what your question is?
That's what I'm saying, because the retail customer who is a part of Valley and Bloom has no identity in terms of using that deck.
Right, okay.
I mean, do you have signs up that say you can't come in unless you're
Yes, I think the expectation is that there will be some manner to identify to the general traveling public that it's not an open garage, unlike the Orange Road deck.
And again, understanding this is a very unique circumstance, so some of these conditions may be left with some ambiguity in other cases, and this is nothing about you individually. I'm just making a note about the clarity that we're seeking. It's really important that we know where people are going, given the homes across the street, the local schools, plural, the hotel, the apartment buildings. There's a lot going on here, so not knowing how you can tell who can park valet under the building is quite germane to what we're weighing here, because this is not in line with the standards set for the property, with variances being requested. We really do need to know these details. So I know it sounds very specific what Carol's asking, but I think it's also very reasonable.
With that in mind, is there anyone else talking about parking?
No.
Okay. So I just want to clarify for the board and for the public. So, because obviously things have shifted over the time of the application review, and I'm reading from our engineer's report. 109 spaces are required. Please correct me if there's any mistake here.
That's not correct.
That's what I'm reading right here.
I believe it's the number is 96, my recollection.
Okay, so this is why I'm doing this. In our engineer's report, it says 109 spaces are required, where only 73 are being provided for a 36-space deviation. However, you're proposing a variance for stacked parking, which is not allowed in the redevelopment plan. If not given, then there would be a 68-space parking deviation. Is that correct?
Which report are you referring to?
March 2nd, 2020, from our engineer. Page 4, bottom.
You're looking at the top of page 5, which are the letter keeps all the prior comments and continues down below. So that was comments at that time, at that iteration.
Okay, good. So let's be
So I
very
think we
clear.
look down to the next paragraph.
Top of
I
page
have to see
6.
So where are we now?
State the demand again.
I think it's top of page 6, is that right?
Top of page 6, the bold comments are just specific to the last iteration, but the last point of demand on.
Top of page 6.
Yes, so I can put that back on the record. So the total parking demand of the site per ordinance, including the elements that for which the RSIS governs, is a total of 96 spaces, 87 for the residential and 9 associated with the retail use. We are providing a total of 73 with the opportunity to provide an additional 6 based on this alternative valet management plan. which would be a total of 79. Prior testimony was put on the record discussing the relative adequacy, in our opinion, of those 73 spaces, primarily due to the overstatement on the demand side from the RSIS for this type of building unit.
Understood. I just wanted to clarify, because there's a lot of numbers here, a lot of copy. I just wanted to clarify for everybody where we are. 96 are required. You're proposing 73. You're saying that the requirement is excessive based on previous testimony, and you're proposing through a valet parking plan another 6 spots gained through valet parking. Is that correct?
Right, we have the potential to do that. Again, the plan, the comments last time from the board were suggesting that. Obviously, as I mentioned before, we were being very conservative in the number of those valet managed spaces that we were taking credit for. We have the opportunity to be more aggressively manage those open spaces in the deck, which would yield an additional 6 spaces to 79.
Okay, so even granting your 79, we still have a parking deficiency of, if my math is correct, 16. Is that correct?
17.
17, okay.
Well, and I don't know that we would agree it's a deficiency in terms of the testimony that was provided. There was a question in terms of whether or not there's actually, or at least our position is that there's adequate parking provided for the reasons previously testified to.
By code, based on the plan at this time,
There's 17 spaces short.
there are 17 spaces short. Is that correct, Counselor?
In terms of what specifically the code requires, yes.
Okay.
And remind me, how many apartments are there?
46.
The 46?
46?
46, yes.
And where are we with the stacked parking? That's off the table now?
Stacked parking is included in the plan.
Included in the plan. If there were no stacked parking, if stacked parking was not allowed, what would be the parking deficiency?
Be 30 spaces less.
Okay. So,
That's 47.
Right.
47.
I'm just trying to keep track of the numbers.
Right.
47, right?
Correct.
So, if strictly adhered to code, you are requesting a 47-spot parking variance. Is that correct?
Well, technically, actually, the stacked parking is a design waiver in our opinion. That's not actually a deviation from the code, but I don't want to argue the semantics, but I should point that out.
In general, the shortfall would be 47 in that instance that the parking stackers were, for some reason, the board determined they were not permitted.
Isn't it a part of the code that requires the parking to be actually on the ground as opposed to stacked? Isn't that, you say it's not part of the code?
So,
I pushed it.
Push it closer.
I'll sit closer.
And keeping with Carol said,
Down, Carol.
keeping with what Carol said, back to
There you go.
page 4, it's, the engineer's report says stacked parking is utilized and requires additional deviation from section 4.7.5 and Montclair Code 281-9A. So, Counselor, you just said that, in your opinion, this was a design deviation. You seem to be in conflict with the engineer who calls it a specific code deviation.
yes, so section 4.75 of the redevelopment plan states that the dimensions of other parking spaces shall be in accordance with section 2819 of the Township Site Plan Review Ordinance. That's all it says, dimensions. So if you look at section 281.9 of the Township Site Plan Ordinance, that has the language that Ms. Willis is referring to in terms it would suggest that the parking spaces should be connected to the concrete, for lack of a better expression.
And should have access to be
Right.
driven pathways to drive through.
So the argument is that in order to be in compliance with section 281.9, that would actually be a design waiver that would be requested of the board. It's not actually a deviation for the redevelopment plan because the connection of the space to the concrete is not a dimensional issue. That's a lack of a better expression, a physicality connection. Look, so at the end of the day, we're prepared to present testimony through our professional planner that we would meet this as a deviation or as a design waiver, but that's the legal analysis that I'm proffering.
Counselor, what is your opinion on this?
You know, it's, I think, I gotta know if it's a design waiver or not. Somebody's gotta tell me. If it's Would a variance,
a
a
copy of the
deviation
plan.
from the redevelopment plan, that's serious. A waiver from, waiver requirement, a design requirement, it's not the same level of scrutiny, and I think you have more flexibility to grant that. So it does make a difference whether it's a deviation or a design.
Microphone, please.
Oh, I'm so sorry.
I'm usually loud enough to hear, but
So what is your opinion?
I don't know. I need advice from more.
4.7.6, what is that? Is that the plan? I thought that was the plan.
So section 475 of the redevelopment plan, it's on page,
I have it right
page 32, my apologies, of the plan.
I thought I had the plan with me, but I
So
guess I didn't
the
at home.
sentence at issue says, dimensions of other parking spaces shall be in accordance with section 281-9 of the Township Site Plan Review Ordinance, period. So the legal argument I'm proffering is that the word dimensions doesn't relate to the elements of section 281-9 of the Township Site Plan Ordinance, is having to do with the connection of the space to the concrete, which, is the interpretation of the problem with a stacker, potentially. It has to do with the width and length of a parking space.
But there is a part of that code that specifically talks about it being on the ground, that that's be on the concrete.
So the
right?
township code, it has language in it which would suggest that, and I'm not disagreeing, that we
Requires.
would need a design
Right.
waiver from.
You don't have to grant a design waiver.
So it's part of the code that it would be required, that it would be parking spaces that you can drive to as opposed to.
Yes, I mean, what I would say is it's probably a misnomer to suggest that the code was specifically drafted with this in mind. I think the code was drafted at a time where stackers weren't contemplated, but I'm not arguing that the language of the township code, and when I say township code, I mean the actual township code, not the redevelopment plan. The township code was drafted in such a way that I don't disagree that a design waiver is appropriate to request.
I'm looking at 4.7.5. This is the redevelopment plan. Parking spaces within parking garages or decks shall be a minimum of 8.5 feet wide by 18 feet in length. If it doesn't comply with that, that would be a deviation. Absolutely. Then the second sentence says, dimensions of other parking spaces shall be in accordance with section 281-9, which I'm not familiar with. Then it says, parking stall dimensions may be modified for valet and other spaces as per the approval of the planning board. I think this was intended to give you some flexibility, but just because you're given flexibility doesn't mean you have to grant this design waiver.
It's a design waiver.
Right. So I'm saying the standard is different for a design waiver than it is for a deviation, which is more like a variance. Just because it's less doesn't mean you can't, you'll have to decide if you thought this was an adequate remedy, whether to grant it or not. And if you don't like it, you don't have to.
The regulations that we've just read don't deal with the height of the parking space, and they don't deal with
There is a regulation,
they don't-
Dennis, that you quoted to us that does deal with the fact that it should be on the ground. I can't find it right now.
No,
for some
that's in
reason.
our
It's
site,
with-
that's in our site plan ordinance, and our site, again, that's not a variance, it's usually a waiver from a requirement, because it's in the site plan section, not in the zoning section.
And what does that section say?
It says that each parking space must be accessed via a drive aisle.
That's what I'm getting at.
But
Where's
again,
that?
these parking spaces are
281.
accessed from a drive aisle.
Right.
Because in order to access a stacked space, the stacker has to be down on the ground. You access it from the ground, and then it raises the car up. The car doesn't leave the ground and go into the space by itself yet. We haven't perfected that technology yet. Really, this ordinance was not drafted with a stacker in mind. I mean, stackers have been around for the past 60, 70 years, but it wasn't drafted with that in mind, and I guess it wasn't anticipated that anyone would ever use something like that in Montclair. Maybe in the city, in Newark, they were using them certainly back in the 60s. But in New York, they've been using them, before then. But I think what we have here, again, based on everything, I think I agree that it's a design waiver. We're talking about the design of how the parking space is configured and what it can contain. And basically, the applicant is proposing that this parking space that would normally accommodate one because of equipment enhancement, design enhancement, can now accommodate 2 cars on top of one another based on machinery that can go in there to allow that to happen. But it's, if you want to get technical and look at the language of the ordinance, it is accessing it from the drive aisle, no question.
I'm going to read something that Janice wrote to us, and I'm just trying to clarify it in my own mind. It says, planning considerations, and this is a memo February 4th from Janice. The amended plan requires the following deviations. A deviation from section 475, which requires that parking spaces be designed in accordance with 281-9 of the Township Code. Montclair Code states that the parking spaces shall be paved with a hard surface paving, which must be connected directly to a paved driveway. The application proposes 30 stacked parking spaces. Stacked parking is only permitted at discretion of the planning board. So that is a code that you're referring to, is it not?
That's exactly what I was referring to, yes.
Right, okay.
And that's perfectly consistent with what the sections that we just read.
That is a paraphrase
Right.
of that section.
Right.
It's 281-9A.
So it's a design waiver, I think.
Back to Martin's question, though, without the board's action, it would be 100 and, what's the number? 96. Got it, great. And so a gap of 47.
Yep.
Correct.
96.
96 required.
Right.
We would have 43 in that instance if the stackers were not permitted for a gap of 47.
Got it.
No matter what, they need a parking variance, so you have to weigh out the benefits versus the detriments.
Right, right.
You don't need to get the number higher if you're not liking it, you know?
I'm sorry.
Well, we're just trying to
if
get a
they-
sense of the magnitude of also what we're deciding on as well, but, yeah. But I get exactly what you're saying.
Well, also, they're arguing that they believe that they've shown you that this will work. So you either agree or you don't agree, and that's what your role as judges to decide. You're hearing the testimony, did they convince you or didn't they convince you?
Right, yeah,
If it doesn't work, it's not good for anybody.
exactly. Thank you.
We have further questions of this witness from the board?
I wanted to ask a question that's in here. Would that be to you or the architect?
Architect.
The architect's
Okay,
coming up
okay,
after me.
Thank you.
What about the public? Any questions of this witness from the public? Ms. O'Toole? Ms. O'Toole.
Adrienne O'Toole, 48 South Willow. In none of these plans have I seen any charging stations included. Are these part of the plans or in the parking situation? Don't we have any need for charging stations?
Well, this is, I believe that there were there charging space? I believe there was testimony
No,
about.
usually developers try to avoid that.
But this is, understand too, that this is is purely residential parking. It does have some parking for a business that's on it, but it's not like it's a standard parking garage. But, Counselor, was there testimony
They said
about
they were going to have
a
one.
charging station?
So I believe the testimony is that we have the infrastructure for the charging stations, but we don't currently have charging stations shown on the plan. And Mr. Chairman, you've already kind of identified the reason.
Right.
So the planning board is still deciding whether to allow this deficiency in either design or space, is that right?
And how we're allowing them a couple of different things to deal with the deficiency if we were to find that this plan that they propose actually works. It would be the design of the space to allow stacking. It would be to require 24/7 valet parking. It would also be to recognize that the unaccounted for spaces, the 17 unaccounted for spaces, don't create a significant impact because the RSIS standards, which we're using to determine the number of parking spaces, is higher than actual usage.
I still refer to this building as the error. I guess we're proceeding with more errors as we go approving. I'm sorry. I hope you all use your heads and know the parking situation in this town.
Any other questions from the public? No, sir.
Tom Mesh, 27 Orange Road, LLC. I have a question. The planter that's next to the driveway,
Yes, sir.
where you colored concrete for the safety of the pedestrians,
Yes.
how high is that going to be?
I believe it's on the order of 24 inches.
Okay, and then what kind of plants? How high will the plants be?
The plants themselves are identified in the landscape plan, which I don't have an exhibit for. They're all low growth. These are not trees or big shrubs or anything like that. The site distance will be clear.
So lower than 4 feet?
Yes.
Okay, because I'm only concerned when I back out, I want to have safety for the pedestrians, because on the other side with the hotel, it's a blind spot now.
Mr. Webb, are you going to be complying with the site triangle there?
I'm sorry?
You're going to comply with the site triangle there?
Yes.
So it should be clear for you to get out.
All right, thank you very much.
You're welcome.
Any other questions from the public of this witness? All right, Counselor.
Thank you.
So next we have Jack Raker from Minnow and Wasco. Mr. Raker would need to be sworn in and qualified as an expert in the field of architecture.
Kindly raise your right hand, sir. Do you swear or affirm testimony about to give in this matter is the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth?
I do.
State your full name for the record, spell your last name.
My name is Jack Raker, R-A-K-E-R.
And you're a licensed architect in the state of New Jersey?
I am.
And provide us with 3 boards you've appeared before recently. Do not include Montclair.
Okay. Jersey City, Montville, and Watchung.
Oh, those are the wrong cities.
Do we accept his credentials anyway?
Yes,
Yeah,
we'll
okay.
accept it.
Thank you, Mr.
Thank you
Chairman.
very much.
Mr. Minnow wasn't available this evening, so but we obviously wanted to keep the show going. Actually, Mr. Raker, I don't want to ask you too many questions since but I know you're here to speak to some changes on the plans which were submitted to the board, which I believe have been marked as Exhibit A 72, and give the board the benefit of that.
Sure. Just give me a minute, and I'm going to get my presentation up. Okay, thank you. I'm here tonight to address a few of the comments that were made last time to Mr. Minnow. And there were some good comments that were there, and we feel we've taken some steps to answer some of those questions and to take on some of those items. The first exhibit I have is a revised exhibit. It's a perspective view. It was shown, I believe, at the last time, except that this one has some modifications. We have added some brick along to the Centro Verde elevation. And you could see in the, the perspective view, I believe it's A10.
And this is exactly what was already submitted, what you're
Correct.
showing here tonight?
Correct. There was one variation from what was submitted tonight in this presentation, and I will point that out to you and show you exactly what was changed.
Do we need to mark this separately then?
Sure. Yeah, we can mark it separately, but I think it's substantially the same. This is just a copy of what's on the screen over here.
Is that the one that's revised? Updated, or is the one on the screen?
They're both the same.
You need to leave one of them with me at the end. This will be A77. So maybe you can mark that one on that board, A77, and leave that with me.
Before you start, where's the, on that, am I missing this? Where's the entrance that goes to the garage for public use?
Far left corner.
No, the walk-through.
Walkthrough's right here.
Right there?
Yep, there's a walkthrough right there.
So, point again, sorry? I don't see a door, that's why. They go through the wall?
All of these items, all
Yeah.
of these are here, it's storefront glass, so that is all, has the potential to get doors in it. So we have, this one right here is a door, and this is the main entry to the building. I can bring up the plan a little later.
Yeah, I
and-
see it
and
on the
show
plan,
that.
I just don't see it on this elevation, that it looks very clear to me where the door
It's
to
there.
the alleyway that gets you to the garage is.
Yeah, it's just, it comes right to the edge of the building, and it's just a doorway in the storefront glass. Okay, so what I want to point out that was changed from the last time you looked at this perspective view is that brick was added to the Centro Verde elevation here, just in the same way it was added previously here. And it's actually quite symmetrical when you look at that corner, when you're looking at this corner. The way we've treated it is we've created it in the same pattern that it is on Orange Road. This is
Sorry, can you just say that again? What are you talking about?
So we've added brick. I believe one of the concerns last time was the extent of, so it's right here.
And that's the southern facade, right?
Correct.
Yes.
Red brick was not there last time.
No. The red brick was there. There's a white brick that was added right here. It's in this L shape, and previously there was fiber cement siding there. Okay, so we've decreased the amount of fiber cement siding on Centro Verde and increased the amount of brick. And I'll go over some of those percentages with you shortly. So here we have the Centro Verde elevation, and in this location here,
Would you identify the slide?
this is sheet A08 in your package. No, I'm just going to leave that one up. So you can see in this location, you can see along Orange Road, we have this white brick L-shaped pattern that goes over this very traditional element down below. And we've done that similar thing here on Centro Verde. We've taken that brick, wrapped it up and over that same very similar aesthetic feature on Centro Verde. So we've reduced, I'm going to go to the next slide, we've reduced the amount of fiber cement siding on Centro Verde by about 50%. It's now only about 14% of the elevation. It's just in this back corner in this lighter colored area here.
So, excuse me, so the back of that is it's a different beige color? It's a darker beige?
Yes.
Two different beiges, okay.
Yeah, you can see the two different colors of the fiber cement here. There's the lighter one here, and then that has a metal bay, and then a darker fiber cement there as well.
Okay, thank you.
Again, we submitted this time showing the elevations that are on the opposite along the property lines to the rear. So we've submitted these elevations.
Please identify the slide.
This is slide A08.1. And as mentioned before, this particular slide is slightly different than what was submitted. There are some elements that we did add, and I'm going to point those out to you. In the slide that was submitted, this brick wall had no relief in it whatsoever. So we looked at that and decided that, perhaps it will get to be visible. Even though it's on the property line, it will be visible right out there at the street edge. So we thought we could get some relief by essentially creating some just small recesses, window-shaped, window-sized, like an old brick building that was had some renovated and the windows were bricked in. So we have created that relief here, and that creates a little bit more interest in that corner element that shares a property line.
I have a question for you. Below the brick, the red brick there, are those cement blocks like you see on Valley and Bloom?
These right here?
Yep.
Yeah, that is a cast stone. And I'm not familiar with the regular, no, then we are using cast stone.
So it's not the
Here.
cement
It's a-
bricks that you
it's
see?
a- No, it's more of a denser material, and it lays up it looks more like a limestone material.
And there seems to be a black line that runs through it? Is that
There is a
brick?
brick band that we've added some additional detailing, and when you look at some of the other elevations, you see that brick banding happen a lot.
And it looks like a little cornice as well, is that?
Correct.
Yeah, okay. And the rest of this is, white brick going towards the back? What is that?
No.
What is that?
No, that's just this is just a standard. It's just that is the block. So this is the concrete block wall going back. But that's all up against the property within 18 inches of another building.
Right, that's the cement blocks,
Yeah, that is correct.
all the
Here.
way back.
Yes, all of this. But again, it's against
I
against
understand.
another building.
Yeah,
The only people
Well-
who are going to see that material are the ones putting it up.
No, that's against the driveway to the other little building that separates your building from the hotel.
We've
Right?
kept the cast stone material as we've rounded the
No?
corner. So this material here is all cast stone, and we've kept it as we rounded the corner.
Okay.
But once we get far enough back, we went back to the masonry block.
Right.
What's the depth of that section, of that cast stone and brick? How far back does that go?
I'm going to say it's probably about 40 feet.
So that's 40 feet back, and the building's 15 feet from the property line?
Correct.
So it's basically your block doesn't start, it starts 55 feet from the property line.
Correct, from the property line, yes.
Okay.
I asked this earlier, and I just didn't want to forget, and you had the elevation up earlier. Can you tell us the length of the building along Orange Road?
Sure, so the length of the building along Orange Road here is about 141 feet.
Yeah, and along those lines, so the length of the building along Orange Road is 140 feet. And if you, what is it, if you add the transformer plus the driveway plus the, whatever is beyond the transformer, what is that size?
It's the entire elevation along.
No, it isn't. So you start, before you reach the entrance to the residential area, what is the size of that space?
Okay, so
You need to go back.
Hear what the question that I'm answering. I'm going to go back to the elevations. You want to know the distance from the edge here?
Yeah, to where the actual doors to the residence are.
I'm going to say this is probably about 25 feet. The transformer's another 20, so about 45 feet.
45 feet. Okay.
Approximately, yes.
Just can I ask you another question? Sure. Are we going to get to Barton Ross's analysis? Should I wait, or should I bring?
We're going to get to that. I'm
Okay.
going to address, I'll address those comments,
Okay.
yes. But I did want to, there was another request for an exhibit of what you would see from Bloomfield over the restaurant. So I wanted to show you that. We did take a view from standing out here, looking back, and you're catching a little bit of this leg of the building.
Now, also indicate what slide.
Okay, slide A01.
A01?
A01?
Yeah. A01. This is an overall sort of aerial view of the property. So on this slide, you see the subject property here. This is the area we took the view from out here on Bloomfield Avenue. We took a shot a little bit north of the opening, a little bit south of the opening, and then a shot directly from the opening. So you only get a small window from which you can see the building, just as you're standing essentially from here to about here. It's only a distance of about maybe 150 feet total. I'm going to go to the before. Up there. So in this view, the only
Slide
portion,
number.
this is slide number A11.1, and this was submitted. So in this slide, you can see, I'm going to just outline the area that is our building, just right in here. It's a very small portion of that overall shot of the impact that you'll see from Bloomfield Avenue.
So to the left is Central Verde, and to the right is the hotel? And then you're right in the slice in the middle?
Yes, right, yes, the slice in the middle, this is the hotel, correct. So it's only this little bit right here that you'd see.
You can't see any mechanical equipment from that angle?
No, you wouldn't see that, not from this angle, no, that would be, yeah, on the top of the roof, it would be much further back. We keep a lot of that stuff internal to the rooftop. It's very difficult to see that, unless you're up on another building looking down. So then, as you slide a little bit one way, a two-story building would block your view of our building. So you can see that happens, and then a little bit further back, you can't see our building, you're just looking at the hotel. And you can see how close we are. I mean, we're not far off the corner here. You can see the door of the corner of that building right there. So we're only about 50 feet to either side of that opening, and you're not really seeing anything.
So what you're saying, you can only see the slice that is your building if you're standing right in front of the Thai Chef restaurant?
Well,
You can't see it from either angle?
You can't see it from an angle, yeah, about 50 feet one way or the other, you're not going to see it.
Mr. Raker, how far back is the proposed building from the street here on Bloomfield Avenue?
You know what, let me take a quick look, and I'll get you a reasonably accurate number. I'm going to say it's about, from where we took the photograph, we took it from across the street because we felt that that would give you the most vantage point of seeing anything. I would say it's about a good 130 feet back. Now, that's from where we were standing. From the right-of-way line, 70 feet, I would guess, 70, 80 feet.
So, looking at the shot that shows the tie, yes, that one. So I see on your building, really the only detail that I see on your building is there is a, what I'll call a ledge. It's not really a cornice that goes across the top. And then it looks like there is a line that runs across part of the darker color portion of the building under the windows on the top floor that runs the whole length. And there's no detail at all on the other building.
There's the material used back here is a Hardy reveal system. There are plenty of reveals from this distance. It'd be very difficult for you to see them, but they are there. They are shown if you zoom in.
Reveals?
Again,
what do you mean reveals?
Reveal. So the Hardy
lines?
system or they're not more than just a line. When you join the material together, the two boards together, there is a metal regulate that goes in between them, and it creates a little U-shaped shadow material. It's not like you see in the adjacent hotel. You could see
it's going to be the opposite of that. As opposed to a raise, it's going to be a recess.
It's going to be a sort of recess, not too dissimilar from metal panel. When you put metal panel together, you get a little recess between the two panel joints.
So the question then remains, why don't you use brick there to maintain a feeling of continuity, particularly with the hotel and the other buildings in the area other than the aberration, which is Valley and Bloom?
It looks like a concrete jungle.
Yeah.
Yeah, I was kind of looking at maybe some architectural detail on that building in terms of, I like the line on the one building. I can see differentiating the other section to kind of break it up, but, maybe changing the color for the line so it stands out more for whatever that ledge, because it doesn't look like that ledge is really that big, but maybe something to give it, a cornice kind of top, again, using the same materials, but working with some color and maybe expanding the width a little bit to give it a little more presence, just so that it has some architectural detail from Bloomfield Avenue. I mean, we have no idea how long Thai Chef is going to stay there, whether Thai Chef will get replaced with another building, or whether Thai Chef will always remain an open space for that courtyard. So we'll have to assume for the time being that we're going to see this section of the building forever, or at least as long as the building is standing, whichever comes first.
I come back to why no brick? Why not keep the material that is seen from the street there as people pass? I mean, it's not. The overall takeaway is not in keeping with section 4.2.1, whatever it is, in that spot.
Well, I don't know that brick would be an appropriate material. I think that we could definitely change some colors and get some of the variety that we have in our other elevations.
When you look at
and create some visual interest.
When you look at the hotel, you see the windows, you see the little ledges underneath the windows, you see, a ridge line as you go up towards the upper floor, the Valley and Bloom is, on that side, is kind of a lost cause. It's a grid, which is, not that attractive. But
it's actually in violation of the plan.
But we're not going to talk about that.
No, but I'm saying,
I know,
it's the same concept.
I hear you. And that's done, but we can do something about this building.
There's
and that's what
a base, a middle, and a top. And this is an area that we're seeing, so I'm suggesting that they adhere to the plan. And since there are materials used in the plan from the areas seen, such as on Orange, where here we're now seeing it from Bloomfield, is that they adhere to what they did on Orange Road. And so, a base, a middle, and a top would be, what one would expect in this area that is actually seen.
So we can definitely look at adding a cornice, a heavier cornice, and/or even trim detailing to separate that base and middle
Right.
and top.
And I don't have a problem with differentiating the two sections. I think that's a good idea. It breaks it up. But, you got to give it some architectural interest because you are seeing it from the main street. And, for all we know, it could be, that could always be the view.
Okay. We can definitely look into that.
And it is it's a limited section of the building that we're really asking you to address.
I agree.
Because I understand, the rest of it, you can't see, the other buildings block it.
Right.
Your hotel guests are going to get an ugly view. Okay, that's on them. But, it's, insofar as the downtown area goes, and our main street.
Yes.
It would be really nice would be a mural, but
Well, we had a submission that we just voted on, that the building had a very unique treatment on the side with what did he use? But he,
Yeah.
and he didn't use marble and high. He used building materials like this, but he created interest with that and with light and with shape.
yeah.
And so, that kind of attention to detail, can be had without asking you to spend, the sun and the moon and the stars on it. It's just,
We agree. I
a design
agree.
issue.
We can absolutely take a look at that facade and add some of the detail that you're thinking of.
Mr. Chairman, on this point, and I may be being a little presumptuous, but I was just going to throw out as a concept that we could agree that we would be revisiting adding the cornice and maybe, this kind of brick band detail, and then if this, or mural or something, and if we were going to, if the board was so inclined to want to get to a vote tonight, that perhaps that's something that could be looked at by Architectural Revisions Committee in terms of a post-approval submission. Obviously, I'm sure Mr. Ross obviously would look at it as well.
I'm sorry, did you say mural as well?
Yes.
Oh, you did, okay.
Are you finished with your testimony, or are you going to address Mr. Ross's comments?
I am. I was just going to just discuss a couple of the comments that he had in his
Well,
letter.
I have a question on page A13, one of the pictures that you took here. So the Orange Road parking garage, 04, the image that you have here on page A13. What garage is that? That's the garage adjacent to the building?
yes, that's the approved plan with the
Okay.
raising lift.
Well, it doesn't look like that. It hasn't looked like that in a year.
Oh, it's never looked like that.
It's never looked like that,
But that's-
ever.
But that's the way that it's going to.
It's under construction.
Yeah. This is the final approved
Yes, it is.
version of what the garage will look like.
And I know this is a totally different building that you're addressing tonight. When would that be finished?
Oh, I don't know. I'm
It's not part of this.
part of that project.
I know, but I just want to put it out there. I was just wondering when it was going to be finished.
I don't know. I'm sorry.
You guys know?
I don't, not to put Janice on the spot, I'm assuming she's probably had conversations with MAP or Elcor probably more recently than anybody else.
Yes, I've had conversations with them, every once in a while. it should be finished this year.
Okay.
Any day now.
And I just had one question before we go to Mr. Ross's note. The Historic Preservation Commission had mentioned if there's awnings, if they might be fabric and material. I don't know if we had addressed that. Right now, it seems like they're made of a metallic.
Right, we don't have any fabric awnings. We're doing a metal canopy over the entry to the building.
And the entry to the
And then on the
retail.
corner as well. Mhm.
Okay, I was just making sure that I had seen that. Okay,
I
thank
think at
you.
one point in time, there was contemplation of awnings, but I think that was a couple iterations ago.
Right, okay.
I may where that went.
Yeah, I'm just making sure we get the last of the
Yeah,
architectural
sure.
questions out of the way. Thank you.
I believe someone had a question about the awning and the awning length too, as well. I'm not entirely sure, but the awning length is strictly limited to this area here, the two entries, the public and the main entry to the building. It's the only place that and then the awning on the corner. So you can see the tiebacks here. There's 3 tiebacks. Those tiebacks bring cables down to that awning and hold it back.
How wide is the awning?
I'm going to say it's about 25 to 30 feet, roughly. Mhm. Yeah, it's-
25 to 30 feet?
Yeah.
How wide is the sidewalk?
Oh, I apologize. It's the width along the building.
Oh.
How far does it extend out? I believe we showed it to be about 4 feet.
Okay. Stand under it and not get wet.
Correct,
And
correct.
that's the entrance to the garage.
Just to open the door.
The garage, the retail, and the residences would all be, that one's the garage and the retail, and then the main entrance.
There is no canopy over the garage entrance or the
pedestrian
transformer.
The pedestrian corridor.
Access.
Correct.
Yeah, the door that you described in the beginning by the glass.
The hidden door.
Yeah,
Would be under that.
would be
right?
under that, yes,
Right.
correct.
And the awning that's at the corner, thank you. Awning that's at the corner extends out further than that. Is that?
I believe that one extends out about 5, or maybe 6 feet. I'd have to get the drawings out and measure. I don't know the number off the top of my head. Yeah. Okay, I just want to address the comments from the architect.
Please do.
The first one is whether we could move the transformer internally. The transformer location is, it needs to be on the exterior of the building, and all of our utilities are on Orange Road. So the transformer location needs to be on the exterior of the building on Orange Road. Now, we can be flexible with its location in that respect. The other thing is the utility's going to have, they own, essentially, we build it, that's their room. They have access to it 24/7. We build it to their requirements and their dimensions. We have very little flexibility in how that room is done. They have a series of standards that we have to follow, door sizes, ventilation, all of it has to be adhered to.
Internal standards.
Internal and external standards. They require certain size doors.
Right, but the size, but not the way that the doors look.
Correct. Ventilation, they do require that room to be ventilated. We have to do that.
Of course.
So we are required to put vents outside of that room as well. But, yeah, we can do them as acoustical vents. So there are some things that we do have some control over.
Mm-hmm. And so, getting to the point, our architect raised about, how that area looks on the street. Is there a way to make it look prettier, make it blend in more than it just being a kind of utilitarian grill grade that sits on the street that interrupts or that, I guess, brackets the glass or ends the glass?
We've treated those doors as we did the storefront doors directly adjacent to it.
What slide is that?
I went back to the elevation sheet, slide sheet A08. So we've treated those doors, and you can see they're shown blown up here.
A08?
So we've organized the size and fenestration and the patterning in the grill work to be similar to the patterning in the storefront that it's directly adjacent to.
Would it be possible to do decorative grill work?
We wouldn't want to draw attention to them. We want them to look just like the regular storefront glass.
But
That's all along.
but that does not look like glass. That does not look like glass. You know, it's a black hole on that side of the building. All right? So you can't avoid, and I understand, you know, based on what you've said, that you have certain requirements for ventilation and that sort of thing. So you need to have some grill work there of some sort. So you can't make grill work look like glass unless you're going to have a glass grill.
Correct.
Okay? So it's not going to look like the storefront.
So, Mr. Chairman, can I throw out a suggestion, maybe picking up on something Ms. Talley said, and based on a comment I made a few moments ago, if there's an interest in the board in terms of perhaps a more decorative grill work.
Well, exactly. I mean, we've done this on other projects that you have served on.
Yeah, so we
so.
could propose that, show it to the revisions committee, and obviously we need to get PSNG's approval on it, but something we could work on. If
that would probably be something worth looking into. The question that I have on this, another question that I have rather on this elevation, I see the niche, the first niche past the garage opening. And then in the next niche, there is one gray panel and 4 light panels. What's the gray panel? Is that a door?
Are you talking about this panel right here?
Yes.
That may be additional grill work as well.
Because that, again, I'm not sure what I'm looking at, so I guess we just need to have some more detail that we can explore, because it's different than what you have on the other side. It looks like a gray door, because even with the other ones, you've got the doors in gray, but you have the grill work in black. So this looks like 2 sections of gray. I'm assuming that, like colors, like substance. But there is no door in that section of that niche, right?
There's not a door. This would not be a door. The door would be the integral grill work. That's part of that. That would be additional grill work that is required for ventilation in the transformer room.
Well, hang on, because sheet A03.1 shows a double door into the transformer room and then a separate single door into the transformer room. And I think that's in the second niche that Chair Nguyen was speaking about.
Yeah, that's...
Yeah, you just had it right there, sir.
I would say we need a close-up
The other
of
one,
that
the other one's
house.
easier. If you go to A03.1, it shows it a little more clearly in my mind. It's got the double door, as you notice on the left-hand part of that slide, and then the single door into the transformer room.
What I'm seeing here then is that with the additional power, there may be an additional vault there that does require access. So then that's probably why the additional door.
So you've got, if I'm understanding this slide correctly, you've got, starting with the very left side, which is the north side of this this facade, you've got grill work, a door, what would we call it, column, pilaster, door, and then additional grill work.
Or glass. Or something.
Well, I assume it can't be glass since it's on the outside of the transformer room.
It would either be spandrel panel that would match the glass. It would either be spandrel glass of some sort.
So it would be glass?
Spandrel glass. So it would be essentially blacked out glass.
Okay.
So I think that it needs a little work.
And is there a way to take the ventilation, the louvers, and put them on the inside, along the ramp for the garage?
No, unfortunately, no.
Is that a PSEG rule?
Yes, and to be honest with you, I have seen it done once and never again. I'm not sure how they did it that one time. We can ask them, but my guess is the answer is going to be no.
So I have a question. Is it your testimony that is, with this current design, that's the only place that transformer room could be? But if there were another design, could the transformer room be on Centro Verde?
The utilities are in Orange Road, so that's why the transformer room is
Has
on
to be
Orange
there.
Road. Has to be there, yeah.
There's no other way that transformer room could be on Centro Verde, hooked up to other utilities that might be on Centro Verde, rather than right on the streetscape of this popular road.
My understanding is that there are not utilities on Centro Verde.
Okay.
Do you have other testimony for us?
So that was the first comment. The next comment was a thicker, more pronounced cornice made of cast stone was a recommendation. I respectfully disagree with that. I think that what we're showing here is we actually do show a cornice. We've just dropped it down one story. So, and it's I want your eye to see this as the detailed cornice. So, as you're looking at the elevation, your eye moves across it, you're catching a lot of the different details. We purposefully left this cornice simple, very simple, and we've added lots of detail to this cornice, essentially one story down. So we're trying to keep your eye and draw your eye to different aspects and elements within the architecture. We're not adverse to adding or doing the cornice. We just think that we've done it, and we've done it here versus up here. And we think it adds, that it just creates that division between that base, middle, and top. It helps add to all of that. If I add a cornice up here, I think it's going to be in competition, again, with this cornice. It's just going to feel a little bit busy.
So why is the corner so plain?
I'm sorry?
Why is the corner over the garage so plain?
We've added additional cornice detailing up above the brick here.
I'm sorry.
This cornice is the largest. I'm sorry.
The other side.
I'm talking about...
on the other side. We did not want to, again, compete with this corner element. So we're changing the areas and the amount of detail relative. We want to control the elements that we think are important, we want you to focus on. So we wanted this corner to be more prominent and get greater focus. So that's why we did that.
I think those were, I agree with your design decisions in that regard. What about where I think Mr. Ross is right on target is the materials for the bump outs. Could you address those
Sure.
issues?
And I believe what he's referring to is these metal bay bump outs here, and then there's a couple along Centro Verde, and they're metal panel. So that material is essentially dictating that detailing. We wouldn't do the metal panel and make it look like a wood bay. We could do that if we went to a different material. Now, he suggested a couple materials here that we couldn't use actually. We would go back to a hardy or a fiber cement, and we could do a bay that had more detail, like the sample that he shows.
Why wouldn't you use an AZAC?
AZAC is not flame spread compliant for a building of this type.
Okay.
Couldn't you use stone?
Stone would not look good in a cantilever. It's not the kind of material you want to sort of hang off the edge of the building. It makes people sometimes a little uncomfortable to see those stone bays out there, especially at the street edge.
I think we've had testimony, you weren't here, the fiber cement really doesn't work with these buildings that appear to in the downtown
It's-
as a secondary offset where nobody sees, as a throwaway, yes, but as a primary material, we see how it's used on Valley and Bloom, it just does not resonate.
We like the metal base. We prefer them, but again, we could do this type of detailing in a fiber cement.
What about a hardy plank, as you mentioned?
Fiber cement is hardy. It is hardy.
Like a...
It would be, what would, the material we would use is a fiber cement trim.
He's showing an example here.
Correct.
On his...
Correct. That could either be fiber cement trim, and you essentially build it up and create these levels and reveals so it looks like wood. It's the way wood bays were designed years ago. We would just use the fiber cement trim boards to do it.
It's boards.
Yeah, they're boards. They're fiber cement trim boards.
As opposed to a panel. When I say fiber cement doesn't work, I'm talking about the panels.
Right, so the panel is used behind, and you use the boards to trim out and create the shadow lines that he's showing. Yeah, we like them. We personally like the metal. We think it works well with a lot of the colors that we have here, the colors of the windows. It draws a lot of that in. If we were to do a bay out of the fiber cement, then we're, again, selecting an alternate color. I prefer the metal, but again, I'll defer. If you think the fiber cement might be a better bay detail, we'd be open to it.
You have anything further for us?
I don't.
Do we have further questions for our architect here? Does the public have any questions of this witness? Ms. O'Toole?
Could you show your A1-11-3? I happened to take a picture of this after it was up, and I'd like you to see this. 11-3. Okay. From the day this went up, I noticed the calamity with this panel. I don't know if it's your pebble or whatever it's called, but can you see this area?
What slide?
It's been like that since they put it up. It's damage. I don't know what it is.
A11-3, I believe she's...
I'm sorry?
I'm just letting them know this slide.
Oh, yeah. Okay, and it's a mistake either with the way it was applied or the material, but it's just as ugly as some of the other stuff that's on the building.
What is she from?
There's a...
That's on the hotel?
Yeah.
East side of the hotel.
Okay.
Oh, yeah.
Oh.
Are there any other questions from the public of this witness? Come on up.
Tom Mesh, 27 Orange Road, LLC. Sir, you said that all the utilities come off of Orange Road, correct?
Yes, I believe that's what I'm told.
There's a handheld mic
You weren't out there to see
on
this?
the, there you go.
Can you bring up a picture of the existing conditions? The existing, I know that there was one up last month. No, it's showing the Ferrara building. No, you had a picture of Ferrara, there it is. All over here, they're telephone poles with utilities. What's going to happen to those utilities that run through Ferrara and follows Elcor, goes behind 27 Orange Road, and it feeds the Thai Chef, and it feeds Bluefield Avenue? Now, I've done research, and they told me that's the only way those utilities are going to get there. Can't get them from Bluefield Avenue, and there was no way to get them from Orange Road. And when Elcor was built, I had a meeting with them, and they assured me that the telephone poles weren't going to be moved, and they were going to be 3 feet off the property. Didn't happen. They moved those utilities, those wires touch my building right now. Now, that's another fight coming up for me. So I'm just concerned what's going to happen now with all the utilities that are behind there that go through that property. Thank you.
Can they
I
bury
think
them underground?
They wouldn't do it. It was Verizon, phone, cable, internet, and public service came in and moved the Verizon telephone pole, which wasn't supposed to be moved. So I'm just concerned with that because it does feed the buildings on Bloomfield Avenue. I don't know what's going to happen with those utilities. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Well, are you going to answer that question, or?
I don't know what the question was exactly.
Well, basically talking about rerouting the utilities, and I don't think that that's something that the architect
But
will
has he
know.
addressed that? Yeah, have they addressed that in their plan?
I think they're going to have to.
Yeah.
They're going to have to, one way or the other. I mean, they can't just remove them.
I mean, the poles are shown on Mr. Webb's set of plans.
And they're going to have to move them in compliance with the utility.
Yeah, I'm not sure if that's something that Mr. Webb has looked at this point, but they're on the survey. And you can just, if you zoom in, there is a power pole that is more or less on the property line, a little bit towards Ferrara's, and then you can just make out a little bit of a wire going along the property line, and I believe right to the back of, looks like 27 Orange Road.
Yeah, my understanding is that per Mr. Brodach's suggestion, they are identified on the engineering plans as, I think they're identified to be relocated. It's obviously something that's going to be worked out with the public utility.
And that's something that you're taking on as part of the development, should it be approved?
Yes.
But not just the public utility. Mr. Mish, I mean, you'd work with him, I guess. It's touching his, it's what's going on, yeah.
They always say there's a plan.
Yeah.
And then it changes.
Yeah.
Just like the front of the hotel changed.
Mr. Mesh, you have to talk into the microphone. We're not going to get...
Yeah.
You know, I've always wanted to work with everybody, and I've done work with them. It's been a long haul. But sometimes they promise stuff, and then it doesn't turn out the way they say it's going to be, like that lady said. It's true. And I'm just concerned about this. Yeah, I want to develop my property when it's my time. Because right now, just way too much damage has been happening to me. It's been a 10-year haul. But I want everything to look nice, too.
Well, they're going to have to reroute.
You know, and I'm willing to work with them, but I'd like to know, not after the fact. Brian told me once the height of a building. I have the original picture. Nothing what that hotel looks like, what he said it was going to be. Okay, but I would like to know about the utilities, because Elcor did the same thing to me. And then you call them, you talk to them, no return calls. Unless you get an attorney, it doesn't happen. All right, thank you.
All right, thank you. Do you have anything else that you wish to tell us?
No.
And are there any other questions from the public? All right. Counselor, you have one last witness?
Thank you. Our last witness, Mr. Moronsky from Langen.
Evening. Have you spoken previously? No?
Not
So-
for this application.
Okay, raise your
Counselor,
hand.
before you do that, how long do you think this testimony is going to be? Just trying to decide whether we take a break now or we take a break after.
If all goes according to plan, 10 minutes, maybe less.
Break.
Yeah,
Okay.
Okay. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Chose wisely.
Indiana Jones and Temple of Doom.
Get ready.
Thank you, Mr.
Maronski,
Chairman.
raise your right hand. Do you swear or affirm the testimony you're about to give in this matter is the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth?
I do.
State your full name for the record, spell your last name.
Sean Moronski, Moronski.
Okay. I'm familiar with your credentials, but could you give us 3 boards that you've appeared before recently?
Yes, West Orange, Edison, Montville.
Mr. Chairman, would you accept Mr. Moronski's credentials?
We will.
You're good
Thank
to
you.
go. Fire away.
So, Mr. Moronski, were you asked to prepare a planning analysis in connection with this application?
Yes, I was.
And what did you do in conjunction with that task?
I reviewed the application, the plans, and the reports submitted, visited the site multiple times, reviewed the Montclair Center Gateway Phase 1 redevelopment plan, reviewed all the board professionals' reports, and attended the hearings for this application.
And you're also familiar with the Montclair zoning ordinance, master plan documents, and other related items to that?
Yes, I did review those as well.
Yeah. Now, can you just remind us the deviations and design waiver that's at issue in conjunction with your testimony?
Yes, the deviation for the number of parking spaces, specifically Section 4.7.2 of the redevelopment plan, 96 spaces are required, 87 residential, 9 commercial, 79, at the latest iteration that showed the 11 valet spaces is proposed for the site. We are also requesting a design waiver for the parking spaces that will be in the mechanical lifts or the stackers, as the Section 281-9A mentions that parking spaces shall have a hard surface that must be connected directly to a paved driveway, and its 30 spaces are going to be on the stackers.
And I believe you'll probably get to this towards the end of your testimony, but based on prior testimony given in this application, particularly with respect to lead requirements versus green gloves, that's also a deviation from the plan?
Yes.
Yeah, no, okay. Now, focusing on the number of parking spaces, can you explain the criteria set forth in the redevelopment plan that must be satisfied in order for this board to grant the requested deviation?
Yes, Section 7.3 of the redevelopment plan outlines the criteria, and there are essentially 2 directions that would go in. One has to do with physical features of the site by reason of narrowness, shallowness of a specific piece of property, exceptional topographic conditions, where the strict application of a bulk regulation would result in peculiar practical difficulties. There's also the provision where granting the deviation, the purposes of the redevelopment plan would be advanced, and the benefits of the deviation and the project would outweigh the detriments. My testimony will be based that the purposes of the redevelopment plan would be advanced by the requested deviation, and that the benefits would outweigh any detriments from the requested deviation.
And additionally, does 7.3 talk about, I guess, what sometimes is in a variance scenario, a negative criteria, but in this case, is there a particular element of 7.3 that addresses that?
Yes, the requirement under 7.3 talks about that the deviation can't be granted unless we can state that there is without substantial detriment to the public good and without, as it's phrased, substantial impairment to the intent and purpose of the redevelopment plan.
So now, with respect to the deviation for the number of parking spaces, can you explain to the board your professional opinion as to whether this application meets the criteria you just described?
Yes. So from the standpoint, first, the redevelopment plan talks about talking about the benefits of each deviation. The 79 parking spaces in that condition, it allows to have a sufficient capacity in order for the project to address peak hour demands on the site. Mr. Pankey's previous testimony regarding parking talked about the previous peak demand for parking spaces. There was also a memorandum from Mr. Giosa, your parking expert, in response to Mr. Pankey's testimony, in which he looked at the peak demand at a higher parking standard. And in both cases, the proposed number of parking spaces was able to address the peak parking demand, taking into account the residential and the commercial demand at the site at a particular hour. And The parking spaces that are proposed, the number of spaces, are actually at a higher ratio than what exists in redevelopment plans in the surrounding area and nearby. Montclair Center Gateway Phase 1 was originally 1.1 space per unit, but that was revised to RSIS standards. The Haynes redevelopment plan requires 1.1 spaces per unit. Seymour Street redevelopment plan, 1.1 spaces per unit. And the Eastern Gateway redevelopment plan of 1 space per dwelling unit. What's being proposed here, whether it's with 73 or with 79 parking spaces, had a higher number of spaces per unit than any of those redevelopment plans as well. And this obviously takes into account the mechanical lift, which provides the 30 additional spaces on the lift system that will increase the capacity, and was previously testified to by Mr. Sokich with regards to the parking management plan, that the lift spaces and all but the 3 ADA spaces will be parked by valets. So it will be managed according to the plan that was presented, and the lift spaces are intended for longer term, less turnaround spaces. For example, the commercial spaces would be the spaces on the ground or in the valet area. The parking spaces that are intended for the stackers are to have less turnaround, less frequency of turnaround.
So now, can you speak to the purposes of the redevelopment plan, if, in your opinion, are being advanced by the deviation as to the number of parking spaces?
Yes, there are several purposes that are being advanced. First, talking about Section 4.7.1, the parking and loading section, the purpose and intent. It talks about for parking, detailed regulations are given to screen new surface parking lots from visibility of public street. And it talks about structured parking behind pedestrian-friendly uses such as retail and housing. This development, although it is not a garage per se, but all of the parking, including the stackers, are entirely contained within the structure of the building. The only thing that you would see from the street is the entrance to the garage, as I'm pointing out to, I forget, was that
A10.
A10, thank you. To A10, that one of the concerns with parking structures and parking, whether it's lifts or spaces, is an aesthetic concern, and that obviously is not the case here, as you cannot see the parking on the inside of the structure. We also further the purpose, Section 3.1, the land use purposes and intent. The redevelopment plan gives attention to the type and design of first floor uses. The idea is to promote pedestrian activity and visual interest, create a streetscape, and the site design by accommodating the parking spaces inside. At the same time, we do provide that first floor use, that commercial use, and the pedestrian area that encourages the activity. And then Section 4.1.1 talks about the building bulk, purpose, and intent, the maximum setbacks to ensure a street wall is appropriate to a downtown. The development is affected by step backs, and also the need to accommodate the required parking supply on site. And the design, the parking layout, and the entirety of the building is intended to address the capacity on site for peak hour demands, while preserving the design elements that are talked about in the redevelopment plans, commercial along the street line, improved pedestrian area, all of these in concert with providing the spaces on site.
Now, can you speak to the benefits of granting the deviation as to whether, in your opinion, they outweigh any detriments?
Yes. Approving the stackers inside would allow for the on-site capacity to be increased without looking for another site where we would need additional parking. Or even if we could, we wouldn't have to expand the building if it were even possible. Mr. Giosa's letter did express concerns about parking lift systems, that they may have mechanical failure from time to time. It was also pointed out this affects one space at a time. Access to these lifts are limited to valets, and the parking would be operated subject to a parking management plan. And as I had mentioned, granting the 79-space parking deviation would provide enough spaces to address the peak hour demand noted in our parking analysis and also addressed in Mr. Giosa's report, which is dated February 4th, 2020. Mr. Giosa's report measured the parking demand at a higher number as opposed to 1.1. It was 1.27 parking spaces per unit. And the peak demand at that was addressed, as was noted in his memorandum. So the granting of the deviation, which allows for the proposed design, it would transform the currently vacant gas station auto body shop with a mixed-use multifamily inclusionary development that addresses peak parking demand and also incorporates other features into the project, such as the sustainability features that have been talked about in earlier testimony.
Now, Mr. Barzi, can the deviation related to the number of parking spaces, in your opinion, be granted without substantial detriment to the public good?
Yes, it can. With regards to the valet parking, residential parking, part of the parking management system, they'll be identified by a monthly credential. They would present it to the valets for retrieval. Retail, commercial users or visitors, they'd be issued a valet ticket for their spaces. None of those vehicles are to be parked in the parking lift systems. I know there was a question, a legitimate concern about, well, who else can park here? But the intention is that the commercial spaces are for the commercial use on site. The valet will also work as part of the plan to ensure that access to the handicap spaces is made available as needed to allow such patrons to be able to pull in to the 3 handicapped accessible spaces, which are closest to the interior entrance inside the parking garage for convenient access. And the valet station office, as was described, is right adjacent to the ADA spaces, so a valet can respond quickly, whether it's to ADA or whether it's to other drivers. With regards to the parking spaces, the residential RSIS standards, which are the basis for the redevelopment plans parking spaces, they're more appropriate for suburban areas. They don't reflect areas such as where the site is that may have denser development, proximity to transit, more urban characteristics. Implementing the RSIS, even if it were possible, would overpark the development, and it would not be consistent with the parking standards for redevelopment areas. And this was also talked about in the Township Master Plan Unified Land Use and Circulation element, amended to April 24th, 2017, and it talked about taking into consideration the parking ratios, for the most part, are used for suburban areas, but also taking into account that we consider that for mixed-use buildings to take consideration for shared parking in the different times where you may have peak hours for parking uses. In terms of can the deviation be granted without substantial impairment to the intent and purpose of the redevelopment plan, we meet several redevelopment objectives. First, with regarding with land use, that's to ensure that the land use mix is compatible with the parking supply. With the stackers, with the valet parking plan, the parking spaces proposed more than adequately address the peak demand that was discussed in Mr. Penke's testimony and also discussed in Mr. Giosa's report. Also, in terms of the redevelopment plan objectives regarding design, section 2.3.3, facilitate a safe and integrated pedestrian and vehicular circulation environment. The valets will operate with the parking management plan. Drivers will not traverse the parking garage other than to drop off their car or to pick up their car. That'll all be handled by valets. And the handicap spaces are located in the most convenient location for safe access. And in terms of also section 2.3.3, a design objective, ensuring the project is compatible with the neighborhood fabric. As I noted at A10, the building is part of the overall redevelopment plan vision for a mixed-use development, incorporating the parking on-site, not dependent on other locations and areas, and that it's incorporated in such a way that it's not going to cause any sort of visual impairment or concern for the surrounding neighborhood. So for the reasons noted, I do believe that the parking space deviation can be granted.
Now, can you speak briefly to the design waiver associated with the stackers?
Yes, the design waiver associated with the stackers, the 30 spaces, They are, as was mentioned earlier by the chairman, they are accessed by a driveway, although not directly, but the cars do have to be driven in. So they do function as part of the parking lot, as they are part of the overall valet parking management plan, as all but 3 of the spaces are done by valet. And with regards to the site plan waiver, it's the idea that the waiver can be granted with the sites that can function efficiently with the granting of the waiver, and with the parking management plan and how it's proposed to operate. I do believe that this waiver can be granted.
And then finally, just to come back to the deviation request to the board to allow for a Green Globe certification process as opposed to LEED certification, can you just briefly address the redevelopment plan deviation standards as to in conjunction with that request, and your opinion as to the same?
Yes, with regards to the Green Globes criteria, I do believe it satisfies the criteria set forth in the redevelopment plan regarding environmental sustainability. The building design promotes active and passive green building technologies, including a solar array, the green roof, the car sharing. The idea is that Green Globes is a recognized standard, along with LEED, where it gives credit acknowledging these environmental features that help contribute to the overall sustainability, and that this is definitely a benefit in terms of how it contributes positively to the site, and in terms of any substantial detriment to the public good or the redevelopment plan. I would say it has no detriment to the public good, because it is encouraging and facilitating the implementation of the green building features, and it is consistent with the redevelopment plan regarding its goals on environmental sustainability and integrating it into the development.
Nothing further, Mr. Chairman, but certainly we're available for questions. Yes.
Questions from the board?
Sidebar, what is the this may have come up early in the hearing, what is the anticipated use of the building? Is it a rental? Is it a condo? Is it going to be short-term suites, similar to the hotel, but not a hotel? What is the building being used for as the residential portion?
It's intended to be rental.
What kind of rental? Monthly? Short-term lease? Long-term lease?
Yeah, Mr. Miller, you
I
want
think
to
the
respond?
answer is it's intended to be a rental like all the other rental apartments in the town. What happens over the years down the road, I don't know, but it's designed as a rental apartment building.
What's the shortest term lease you would anticipate at this moment in time?
I can't commit to knowing, just like anybody else can't, but generally the leases are a year at a minimum.
Isn't Valley and Bloom, just a question, don't they have 3-month leases there?
I don't know. I mean, sometimes there are leases that are shorter than a year. That's why I said I couldn't commit to it. But in general, most leases are that, unless you're talking about something other than a rental apartment complex.
Do you ever intend to use these for like a 3-month lease that would be a furnished unit?
Again, that isn't our plan, but I can't say that that wouldn't happen
So
in
it
the
could
future.
potentially happen, that you could have a 3-month lease of a furnished
That's
unit?
not our plan.
Mm.
Do you, Mr. Stoller, intend to remain owner, manager of this building?
We're involved as an owner today, and we haven't closed on the land, so nobody's an owner right now. But that is the plan, to be involved and to build this project.
Until you build the project?
It's to build it. Hampshire, as you know, is here, and Mr. Joseph is here on behalf of Hampshire, and they are the partner who has been involved with this from day one.
Other questions?
You mentioned that there's no detriment to the public good.
No substantial detriment.
No substantial detriment. Can you explain how this is of significant benefit to individuals in immediate vicinity, within walking distance, and then the greater Montclair?
Well, I think there are a couple of reasons. One has to do with aesthetics. One of the concerns with parking, whether it's in a structure or whether it's in a type of facility, is being able to screen parking from being seen. I mean, we see that, for example, with parking garages. They want to camouflage the frontages and so forth. In this case, the applicant is able to contain the parking entirely within the building, and that you, unless you knew that there was parking in there, if you were just passing by, you wouldn't necessarily know that. So I certainly think from an aesthetic point of view, that's helpful. Then there is the functional point of view, the idea about satisfying the parking need on site, because there were concerns addressed by at least one neighbor in previous testimony about cars being parked on the streets. And the applicant has gone to a substantial effort to make it that we can accommodate the peak parking demand on site, including both the residential and the commercial. So I do believe, just from a practical standpoint, in terms of concerns about nearby parking, from an aesthetic standpoint, and then when you add those together, you're redeveloping the site as it was envisioned in the redevelopment plan from its current condition to a mixed-use building. So I think for those reasons, those would be public benefits, not just benefiting the owner per se, but an overall community benefit.
Again, a kind of back to basics question. Rather than asking the board to approve a substantial deficiency for parking, why not make bigger units and require less cars?
Well, this is the application that I'm providing testimony to, and this is, and I do believe that based on the previous testimony presented regarding peak demand for parking, that the number of units that we have and the number of parking spaces proposed can be accommodated on site, and also talked about how the parking standard here compared with similar type of redevelopment is substantially higher when you're using a suburban parking standard in the form of RSIS. I know that's what the rules are, but I believe that based on previous testimony and what I stated tonight, that the ratio per unit here, which is higher, certainly higher than 1.1 or the 1.27 that Mr. Giosa discussed, can be accommodated on this site. So
you're making the argument that there is benefit and that you can handle and accommodate what is clearly a deficiency. I'm asking why not eliminate, this is a simple question, why not eliminate the deficiency by proposing less apartments in the same space even?
That's not my call.
The applicant is presenting this particular application with 46 units that have been developed to be in compliance with the redevelopment plan, with the exception of the deviation and the design waiver, which are being testified to, and the testimony that the applicant has proffered, the applicant's experts have argued, and certainly I would argue, satisfy the intent of the redevelopment plan in terms of both the, as Mr. Boronsky testified to, the purposes of the redevelopment plan being advanced and the no substantial detriment to public good or to the intent and purpose of the redevelopment plan. Obviously, I don't want to rehash his testimony, but and at the risk of not being circular, but it's. I understand your question, but the answer is that we'd like the board to consider this application because this is the building that the applicant believes is the appropriate use for the site.
Granted, Councilor. Given that, is there any hardship under the redevelopment plan by the applicant having less units to not request a deviation in parking?
I'm sorry, can you repeat the question?
Is there any particular hardship under the redevelopment plan that the applicant faces by having less units to not then request such a substantial deviation in parking?
Well, again, not to sound circular, I mean, I think the answer is the applicant has determined that this is the building which it believes, from a number of probably business perspectives, is what makes sense to request from this town, or from this board in terms of permission to build.
So it's a business request. It's not, there isn't any.
No.
There's nothing under the plan.
No. It's a project that complies with the redevelopment plan, but for the deviation that was just testified to in the one design waiver.
Understood.
Yeah. So, I think that actually answers the question.
And this goes back, what you're saying, Mr. Schwartz, goes back to your response that the applicant has gone through substantial effort through shared use cars, the lifts, 24/7 valet, but much of this could be mitigated by not pursuing the route that they've gone down, I think is what Mr. Schwartz is saying. So it feels a bit to us as though perhaps a hardship has been created by using the property in the way that's been articulated. And it would be helpful for you to explain to us how that may not be the case.
I'll let Mr. Morawski answer, but yeah, I don't think we've testified that we're seeking a hardship.
We are not seeking a hardship, and my testimony was that there's no substantial detriment from the requested parking deviation that we have, because we have using the ITE information regarding the peak parking, that we are able to accommodate that peak parking demand on site, and that's a key aspect. You know, if we're able to accommodate that, you know, even using the numbers from Mr. Giosa's report, I believe it was 68 spaces in total, or I have 79 spaces. So if we're able to accommodate with spaces left over, there is no substantial detriment, in my opinion, from what we're requesting for the number of parking spaces.
Yeah, and just to correct my wording, not hardship, but detriments have potentially been created.
Well, it's a question of whether what we're proposing will create a substantial detriment. And I think part of our task as an applicant has been to address how we deal with the parking demand in terms of the management plan, in terms of the number of spaces. And even tonight earlier, Mr. Webb showed where we added potentially 6 more spaces based on what Mr. Sokic had said that could be accommodated under a parking management plan. So these are the actions that I believe create a situation where there is no substantial detriment with the requested 79 parking spaces.
Yeah, and just reading directly from the C2, we're just trying to look for the benefits of the deviation that would substantially outweigh any detriment.
Mm-hmm.
So that's simply what we're wrestling with.
I understand, and I believe I did present those in my testimony. Thank you.
Any other questions from the board?
Actually, just to clarify, it's so technically the deviation standards are at 7.3 of the redevelopment plan. So it's you mentioned C2, so it's actually different than C2.
Other questions? Questions from the public of this witness concerning his testimony?
I'll have a question later. Will be a period later for a general opinion, or do you have a question there?
There will be a period for general comment. Okay, it doesn't appear to be, yes, Mr. Giosa.
Hi, Gerard Giosa, parking consultant to the planning board. I would just like to go on the record as to correct something that from this gentleman's testimony. In fact, in my February 4th memorandum, I did not say that there was adequate parking supply on site. In fact, I will directly quote from that memorandum. It says, "It is estimated that parking demand generated by the project may overflow out of the on-site parking area during certain peak times, and then underlined, if the retail space is developed as a restaurant. And if you'll recall, Mr. Penske came up and provided testimony saying that the space would not be developed as a restaurant. In fact, the space would have no waitress service, no bar, tavern, or alcohol, and would be limited to 30 seats. So I think that's an important distinction to make that was not put forward by this previous testimony.
And Mr. Joseph, just to clarify, with the applicant's prior agreement to the conditions that you suggested, that would satisfy I guess, the concern about the parking, is that fair?
Yes, per Mr. Penske's testimony.
Yeah. Yes.
And statements that there would be limitations and restricted use of that commercial space.
Right, which we've agreed to. Thank you.
I just wanted to say, I admit, I did not put that on the record. It was unintentional on my part, but that it was with those conditions that my testimony was based on.
Anyone else? Okay, Counselor.
That actually concludes our case, so Mr. Chairman, at your pleasure, I guess, if the public has comments or...
As Counselor has observed, the applicant has completed his case, and now's the point where the public is allowed to make any comment that they want to make concerning the application as a whole.
Adriana O'Toole, 48 South Willow Street.
Do you swear to tell the truth, whole truth, and nothing but the truth?
Yes, I will. Having been both a planning board and a Board of Adjustment member, I know what you're going through, and I don't think we ever allowed as much excess parking as these two boards have since I was on that board. I compliment the developer for really hiring marvelous representatives. They're very good. They're really terrific. However, I agree with Martin Schwartz. And wasn't this whole thing an error to begin with? Reducing the size that's needed would certainly solve the problem. We have a terrible parking situation in town. You know that. Some of you don't even come downtown because you can't park. And it's not a peak hour. Peak is all the time in Montclair. And all these words that are used, deviations, we don't need another deviation. And they're going to use this as another example to come forth another time with something that is less than necessary. Reduce the size of your apartment. We don't even know if these are one-bedroom, two-bedroom, or three-bedroom apartments, do we?
We do.
We do? You do. Okay, so we're not discussing that. But I certainly think we should not allow any excess over the requirements. We're overdeveloped as it is. You don't need my voice to say that. You all know that. You live in town. So I leave it up to you to make a decision that we can live with.
Thank you.
Thank you. Anyone else? Councilor?
Mr. Chairman, it's been a lot of hearings, so I don't want to belabor a lengthy closing. I would note, though, with respect to the deviation that's being sought by the applicant, particularly with respect to the number of parking spaces, that the expert testimony that's been presented with the condition requested by Mr. Giosa, or conditions, it's uncontroverted expert testimony that the proposed number of parking spaces is sufficient for the proposed use of the site. And with that, obviously, there were a number of other conditions that we've discussed over the course of these hearings in terms of addressing architectural and other concerns by the board. And it's been a very collaborative process, and another, I think, example of where this board is able to, I guess, creatively work with a developer and an applicant to solve issues. And I would point to the solar and the green roof, and I think we've come to a lot of great proposals with a great potential project, and I hope you'll vote yes.
All right, thank you. So the hearing is closed, and we need to discuss and see what the board's pleasure is. So the floor is open to the board. I know we have some strong
I really have
opinions.
no further
I know we have
comment
some
at this
strong
time.
opinions here, so don't all rush at once.
No, but yeah, for the most part, I think my sentiments have been expressed, so.
I'll go next. I think it's a fundamentally flawed building. I think that there could have been better use made of Centro Verde as a service road. It's really not a road that people use for any other reason than to go into the garage and turn around, but they gave testimony that it could not be used in any other way, but I think the design, there's not enough retail space in the front to make it a lively, activated streetscape that would be attractive to people coming from the different schools, the neighbors across the street, people in the hotel coming and hanging out there. About 25% at least of the space is a transformer door and a driveway. And then that's next to another driveway, and then there's the 2 hotel driveways. I mean, I think some of that could have been eliminated with a better design. I think the rooftop, one would think you would take advantage of potential views from the rooftop, but right against the wall there are solar panels. So to me, that's another flaw. I could go on about the design, but anyway, I'm not pleased with the design. Fundamentally, I think that we're hanging our hat on the success of valet parking once again, and I really object to that. I think that you have, the testimony was that there's a 75% turnover in the people who work for the valet company, and I just feel like, if that doesn't succeed, you have a big flop with respect to the parking. What else? I agree, too, that we should have stuck with a smaller building. Certainly, there's some shadow cast over this whole application by the way it was supposed to be 18 units, and now it's gone up to 46, and how did that happen? We would have said maybe there was a typo in the plan, and certainly it seems like it's a big benefit to the developer to have that typo, we'll call it. What else? I feel like it's a very, very large lobby for some reason. I think the door of the residential unit should once again not have been right there present, taking up a whole lot of space on that street. If you had another retail space there, that would have been much better for activating the whole streetscape. Basically, if you shoehorn too many units, too much parking into a small lot. So that's about it.
Yes,
Please, Carol.
Right. Well, my concern, again, is with the parking as one of the issues which is, I think, significant. Montclair does have a parking shortage in general. There's a long waiting list for parking. I understand, my understanding is that if we built another deck, we could fill it immediately just with the waiting list for parking. The area in which the building exists is on a very busy, congested, small space between Bloomfield Avenue and Hillside, because Central Verde is really an alley, but between Bloomfield Avenue and Hillside, we've got the hotel, we've got the daycare, we've got a school, we've got a parking deck, and now we're adding another relatively large endeavor. And I don't think that the plan that has been proposed is been demonstrated that it can work smoothly. Now, I think it is an advantage to have at least attempting to put all of the parking in the building as opposed to not having it all in the building. But I think the real issue is that there is so much demand for the number of apartments there that is what makes it so difficult to provide the spaces. I think that's always been paired together, that the number of units comes with it required for parking, and that perhaps more of the building could be used, that space could be used for parking, so that there was a balance between what the retail can be and what the parking is that's available. Because the plan that's been put forward basically says that in order to accommodate the number of residences, that the one retail has to be one which does not require too much parking. It has to be selected. It cannot be a restaurant. It cannot be medical. It cannot be a number of things because there is no parking to support a retail that requires too much parking. So I think that really there's a flaw there somewhere in that the goal of adding mixed use is to build up the number of businesses in town and provide an opportunity for business. And in fact, we end up with this particular space of a building which is very small area for retail, and then that retail has to be controlled so that it doesn't take up too much parking. So I'm not happy with how it turned out. I do think it's an improvement to have, or at least to accommodate all of the parking required within the building, but I'd like to see a plan which did that without putting so much pressure on the retail side in favor of the residential side.
Okay, thank you. I so appreciate the removal and the remediation of the empty auto repair shop. I mean, it is an eyesore, and I certainly don't want that to linger there any longer than it has to. But I also agree with my colleagues here that I believe the building is just too big. 46 apartments is a lot to put there, and I also, it's a little unclear, the relationship of the hotel with the building, and it almost sounds like it might become an extension of the hotel, which is troubling. I don't even, maybe you could get room service in the apartments. And I also, we had asked early on if the building could look a little more traditional, and I know that you tried, and the architects tried that, but it still remains there's 7 different fabrications and materials on the building, and it's just doesn't look right for me on that street. But ultimately, I cannot support a variance of 47 parking spots with one person dealing with all those cars. I don't know how one person can deal with half of that amount of cars. And like Carol said, it's a side street. It's a small side street, and it has 2 schools. And to add all of these cars into that little corridor, it's just too much to bear, I think. And there's neighbors there. There's people live there. They've endured enough. So those are my comments.
Given the substantial deficiency requested for parking to code, whether we call it a design waiver, a code waiver, a parking variance, I find that request in that location not to be in the public good. In terms of waivers under 7.3, I find the purposes of the redevelopment plan not being advanced by the detriments created by that parking deficiency. I find those detriments outweigh the benefits, and the public good is not advanced. On the parking side, under 4.7.5, in terms of the design of the building, while much improved, I still find portions of the site plan proposed based on the testimony and exhibits not fully in keeping with sections 4.2.1, 4.2.3.3, 4.3.4.1, and .2, such that the public good is advanced by accepting those deficiencies at this time. And perhaps they could be remediated, as could the parking remediated, so that there is not such a deficiency. If that's the case, I think we could take a look at another application, but in its present form, from the site plan proposed, I will have to vote no.
Yeah, I agree with one thing that Ms. Willis said about sacrificing retail for the residential. I mean, it would seem like it'd be a lot nicer to have more retail here to kind of complement the amount of residential that's at this development. So, and I am a little bothered by, limiting it down to just certain food service options. I mean, I think it would be great to have a destination restaurant there, but you can't park it. So, I mean, it necessarily excludes that concept and that option, which that does bother me. As to how we got here, I feel like I have to put that out of my mind with how everything was, how we got to this point with the dwelling units and the change and whatnot. So I do think it's, a lot of dwelling units, but I also don't think that we can say no to the dwelling units because of how we got here. In terms of the parking, if our parking consultant is saying that this development with these restrictions can be parked, I'll agree with it. I have experience on one site in particular in the city where they use stackers, and my job is to inspect the parking garage floor and walls, so I sit in there for a good day about once a year, and I see how these stackers are operated, and I don't have an issue with them. I mean, they seem like it works well with, I usually think of there's one or two gentlemen that are working in the valet office, and I've never seen an issue. I've never seen people lined up to get their car. I don't know what kind of management system they use, but as it comes to assuming this development were to use similar technology or however they get it to work, I think it comes down to the management. If the management works out, I think it could work. So I'm comfortable with the parking deficiency because I think it's going to, the amount of parking that's provided will meet what's here, according to our consultant, and I'm comfortable with the stackers. So I would support the application.
I admire the creativity of the parking. I think it'll work, right? Where I have to park in the city, it's far more dense, and it's run by one guy. And I'm very surprised he can get any car in and out of there, so this isn't very dense at all. But I think the building itself there are too many apartments. I mean, 1/3 of the buildings are studios. And I just think that by making more one-bedrooms or something like that, it would reduce the demand for parking, have less units. The design of the building itself, it sort of relates to the block and probably not much else of Montclair. It's okay, it's not great. There's no amenities in the building. Most apartment buildings these days have exercise rooms, and they have rooms for, dining rooms and different conference rooms, things like that. This offers nothing. What else? I could go either way on this building. It doesn't really tell me. It's not great, it's not awful.
And part of what I was balancing too is, based on the redevelopment plan, is this better than what would be there? Would you not need waivers? And just from a planning perspective, I just don't see it in this case. And if there's ever a time to have a building that fits within the space that's given, I think this is one to apply that just from a planning perspective, given all that we have going on in the area. So that's at least the way that I kind of was thinking through this, even in the questions that I was asking. But I really, really do appreciate the flexibility and the responsiveness to a lot of the suggestions that were made to improve the design and the building and the way that things were laid out.
I just want to say one more thing. My only regret is that we would lose 5 units of affordable housing if we downsize the building.
Good point.
I agree with a lot of what Keith said. I think the parking can work. We do have a parking issue, and the parking issue for me right now is not feeling that I actually know what the true parking issue is in town. I've said this before. We have a lot of new construction. We have a number of parking spaces that have been added to the inventory, and we have parking spaces that are on deck to be added, presumably within the next year. But we have talked about shared parking and buying permits, and I find myself being somewhat confused about how it all balances down. With that being said, though, this building, I think, stands somewhat differently with respect to the parking because it's not a public parking structure. It's not really a structure that's primarily going to be used for retail parking. It's primarily going to be used for residential parking. And I think if the parking doesn't work, that the residents will force it to work, or else they'll move out. And then whoever owns the building is going to have a problem. My experience is similar to Steve's, where I've seen these things in action in New York, and I've seen people manage much more densely parked air spaces with 1 or 2 people. And I do think that they could squeeze a couple more cars than what they actually showing on the plan, if in a pinch, because you have someone there who is actually one person who is moving the cars around. My main concern, well, before I get to that, the building itself, I again would thank the applicant for being attentive. They've responded to the comments and suggestions and issues that the board has had. And I think the building is much improved over the original that was submitted to us. It's not a bad-looking building, but with that said, it's not a great piece of architecture either. But it's not a bad-looking building, and it needs some work. And I think we could massage it a little bit more if we were so inclined. But the one thing that does bother me is the restriction on the retail space. Again, another thing that I've said before is dealing with the spaces that we're creating into the future, where we've already got a requirement that this building's going to have a 24-hour parking valet, and now we've got another restriction on the type of retail that can go in it. I have mixed feelings about that because the location on Orange Road. Orange Road's a county road, but it's off this location's off the strip. There's no other commercial buildings on Orange Road. There's schools, the parking garages, the hotel is the other commercial business. So, creating a connection with the hotel, I think that, based on what I've seen developed on other streets like Midland Avenue, as you turn the corner from Bloomfield, and the other side streets that, you can carry a business, 1 or 2 in the street, into the street, and have interruptions in the space. We have streets like that already existing in town. So I would really have to think a little bit more about whether or not the restriction on the retail space is how much of an issue it is. But that's my main issue. I mean, I would be inclined to support the application, but with the proviso that it still needs some massaging. The number of units, we don't have a choice. That's not up to us. That's already decided, and another body, council, has already stated for what it's worth in the ordinance. So we have to go along with that. That's what's permitted here. It's the variances that we really are looking at here. And while the parking works, I'm still a little bit concerned about the retail use and enforcing the restrictions on that use going forward, and how that would play out, over the next 5-10 years.
I wanted to supplement my comments. I neglected to mention that the applicant used an exhibit A14 as context imagery, and in my opinion, that is different than substantially different and not in keeping with what the building ultimately looks like.
What was A14 again, Martin?
Pictures of other buildings.
Number of buildings in town.
Seymour Street
Oh.
and
Montclarian, Vestry.
The Sienna, I think, was in there.
Yeah, that's not the historic flavor of town, no. So, we haven't, no one's made a motion at this point. Counselor, do you want us to move on to the motion stage, or do you want to hit pause?
Can we hit pause for a second here, Mr. Chairman?
My best practices is never deliberate, and then the time to get us to pause should be before we deliberate. Just saying. Sure.
Well, we do things a little differently here.
No problem.
So can we have 2 minutes?
Yeah.
Mr. Chairman, thank you.
Yep.
And sometimes, you let them do that. They gotta play it to the end.
You just gotta jump in.
Sorry. You don't have to before I tell you.
So, Mr. Chairman,
Back on the record.
So, Mr. Chairman, we'd like to respectfully request, at this time, there's no motion pending, that perhaps the matter could be adjourned to another date. There's a couple things we wanted to talk about internally, and I guess if Mr. Chairman, if you and the board members are amenable to that, that would be our request at this time.
I think we can do that. We would certainly allow you the courtesy of discussing it further and coming back to us.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
All right. When would that date be?
We waive the time.
So this would be adjourned to April 6th? Does that work for you? It's a month.
If they're going to submit anything new, it's got to be 10 days before that, right?
Absolutely.
He's good.
If that doesn't work, I can give you May 4th.
His voice will be back by the next time.
He'll be back.
You get the first comment.
Oh, it's April 6th, right?
April 6th.
Competes with Sunday.
Yeah, we can do April 6th.
April
We were just trying to calculate days to make sure we're
I
we have
know,
some time.
I know. April 6th, okay.
All right. See you then. Thank you. Okay. We have any committee reports? Don't think, do we?
I don't have anything to
Okay.
report.
Bills?
We do have bills.
CFO?
We do have bills. I would move to approve the bills.
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? Abstentions?
All right.
Okay.
Thank you, everyone.
It's very nice of them to come, because it was, yesterday was daylight savings, everybody's tired.